Welcome to the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast, Season 4. This podcast is for and about people getting ready for their first ever pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, France, and Portugal. With your host, Camino guide and longtime pilgrim, Nancy Reynolds of the Camino Experience. Hey pilgrims, Nancy here, back for the final episode of Season 4 of the podcast. If you usually fast forward through the introduction to these episodes, this is the one time when I suggest you don't do that. This episode starts right away, or nearly right away, with the actual content I want to share with you. I will be sharing with you updates from the Camino Frances, including things I learned and discovered, and in some cases validated as I led my May Camino Experience group from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port. Specifically, I will talk about the many different ways pilgrims are doing the Camino. Then I will give you some updates on the luggage transport services on the Frances route and what's up with accommodations and booking ahead. I mean, how busy is it really? Before I do that, though, I'm going to walk you through my own personal itinerary for my 6-day walk as a way to introduce you to some different types of accommodations. Now, if you are listening into this podcast for the first time, welcome. I would like to invite you to circle back to Season 1, Episode 1, to hear what this podcast series is all about. If you are planning your first ever pilgrimage on one of the Camino de Santiago routes, Season 1 is the best place to start. There we walk through all the big questions a first-time pilgrim has to answer. When is the best time to go? How long does it take? How much will it cost? And who will I go with? Things like that. Plus, you will get to hear from other first-time pilgrims just like yourself for inspiration and validation that you are on the right path as you plan and prepare for your pilgrimage. Now, I said we would jump right in, so let's do that. I'll start by putting the pin in the map on my own walk this spring. I always like to add in my own mini pilgrimage when I go to Spain to lead a group. In this case, I walked for 6 days before I met up with my group. I started in Nájera, which is about 30 kilometers west of the beautiful city of Logroño and about 93 kilometers away from the equally beautiful city of Burgos. When I walk the Camino, my sweet spot for each day is around 15 kilometers, so don't be too surprised when I tell you that I took 6 days to go 93 kilometers. Why did I choose this section? A couple reasons. I love this part of the trail in the spring. The fields are a dozen shades of green, rolling in every direction, usually under a giant big blue sky that's filled with puffy white clouds. And the wildflowers in the spring are off the charts. You have thick fields of vibrant yellow rapeseed flowers and red poppies sprinkled along the trail. There's something about that combination of vivid blue, yellow, and green that makes my heart sing. What didn't make my heart sing, but rather what made my ears ring, was the relentless wind, which is one of the lesser talked about weather features on the Camino. Another reason I chose this stretch is because I could do it in the time I had available. I had exactly 6 days for walking before I needed to get to Pamplona to get the bus to Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port, and the towns on this stretch are spaced perfectly for me to plan distances that were within my reach. And the final reason I chose this stretch is because I wanted to walk into Burgos. There's a 40-kilometer stretch from Villafranca Montes de Oca to Burgos that I have skipped too many times to count. Actually, it's easier to count the number of times I've walked it, 3, including last month. Let me share why I've skipped it so many times. I'm just going to lay it out there and be honest with you about my shortcomings as a pilgrim. From Villafranca Montes de Oca, there is a 12-kilometer stretch with no services, and most of it is uphill. Mentally, I struggle with the psychology of not having a rest break for the 3 hours it takes me to walk 12 kilometers. I joke that if I were to write a book about my many Camino experiences, it would be called Bar Hopping Across Northern Spain. But the reality is that those bar stops are pins in the map for me and the way that I measure my success, moving from one stop to the next. Those bar stops are where I know I will have a chance to interact with other people, whether they be other pilgrims or local people who serve the pilgrims. I will be able to get food and a drink if I need them, and there will be a toilet break as well. From Montes de Oca, the walking pilgrim continues on to Ajes and then Atapuerca. And then it used to be that there was another long stretch without services before you got to the long, tedious slog through the industrial outskirts of Burgos. The other vivid memory I have of that part of the trail is the lack of vegetarian food. I remember one difficult food day when I had the popular egg and potato dish, it's called tortilla española, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because there were exactly no other vegetarian options available on that stage. Things have changed, but that picture in my mind, collected on my Every Step of the Way pilgrimage in 2007, has inspired me to take the bus from Oca to Burgos nearly every time. But not this time, although my mind did try to negotiate a bus opt-out. This time I walked the entire way from Nájera to Burgos, stopping in Cirueña, Grañón, Belorado, Villafranca Montes de Oca, and Atapuerca. Now, if you're planning to walk the Frances route, you may want to have a pen and paper handy because I'm going to share with you some highlights of this part of the trail, specifically where I stayed and why I stayed there and how it went. If you want websites and details in writing, check the show notes. Ready? Here we go. I started in Nájera and stayed at a place I've stayed before, Pensión San Lorenzo. Reception is run by Laura, who speaks excellent English. I speak enough Spanish to get by, but I always appreciate when someone speaks English. Laura and her father run the pension, which is actually 2 properties, about a 3-minute walk apart from each other. I've stayed in Nájera many times, and Pensión San Lorenzo is my favorite place in that town. In case you aren't familiar with what a pension is, typically pensions are family homes turned into guest houses. Often the only language spoken will be Spanish, and don't expect someone to be at the reception desk overnight. In a pension, some of the rooms may have their own bathrooms, but more often they will have bathrooms down the hall that are shared by several rooms. Pensión San Lorenzo has both, and you can book it on booking.com or directly on their website. On my first day of walking, I went as far as Cirueña. This is a tiny village about 6 kilometers before the larger city of Santo Domingo de la Calzada, and I chose it because in all my years on the Frances route, I had never stayed there. There isn't much to choose from, but I found a private room at Casa Victoria. I'm not sure exactly how Casa Victoria is classified in the world of hospitality, but it has private rooms with private bathrooms, and it has a refrigerator and washing machine available for guest use. There is an albergue in the village with the same name, and that's where you get dinner if you want to have a pilgrim's menu and share the meal with other pilgrims. I booked Casa Victoria on booking.com. Just be sure to read their cancellation policy carefully, as once you book, you are committed to half the payment. My next stop was Grañón, another first-time stop. Grañón is famous for Albergue Parroquial San Juan Bautista, where pilgrims prepare and eat a meal together and then sleep on mats on the floor in the loft of the church. It is widely known as one of the most impactful nights on the Camino. But that's not where I stayed. This is where I made my first booking error of the trip. When I was planning my stages from home, I had selected a casa rural where I wanted to stay. I confirmed that they had a room on my date and I entered it into my spreadsheet. But I didn't book it. I hesitated because the booking was non-refundable, and I wanted to be sure a couple other places were available before I committed. And then I forgot and didn't book it. So 2 days out from Grañón, I realized I hadn't booked anything, and I panicked. It wasn't a big panic, because this is where Booking.com is a godsend. I found a place with mediocre reviews located about 500 meters out of the center and just booked that. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment with a complete kitchen, washing machine, and a living room with a couch. I paid around 55 euros for that apartment, but I think that was an exceptional price, much lower than normal. I'm thinking probably in an attempt to try to fill empty apartments at the last minute, because now when I go to Booking.com, the prices are quite a bit higher. In any event, apartments are a great choice if you are part of a small group walking together or if you are a family. It was a bit much for just one person, though. It also wasn't my favorite place, and here's why. The cleaning wasn't all that impressive, and the check-in process was tricky. It was all by messaging on WhatsApp and not very clear. That meant that there was no real human contact, which, quite frankly, I want after a long, hard day on the trail. My next stop was Belorado, and the only private room I could find when I was making my bookings from home was an albergue called Caminante. The best. The hospitality was wonderful and just what I needed after my isolated night in that apartment. The room was comfortable and the shower was out of this world. They do also have dorm rooms for those who want the shared environment or who are on a smaller budget. And they served a pilgrim menu in the comedor or dining room downstairs or in the garden, which was my choice. Many albergues now have private rooms, and they are an excellent option for pilgrims who want to be part of the albergue pilgrim community, but don't want to sleep in the shared dorms. Usually, private rooms in albergues are less expensive than other types of private rooms, such as hotels, but they are close in price to pensions and other family-run accommodations. Next up was Villafranca Montes de Oca, where I returned to Hotel San Antón Abad, a favorite stop of mine. This hotel feels quite fancy and grand, and the price for a private room is higher than other places, but not crazy. If this hotel was in the U.S., the cost would be double or triple the 68 euros I paid, and breakfast may not have been included in the U.S. The interesting thing about Hotel San Antón Abad is that they also have an albergue as part of the hotel. The story I heard years ago was that the hotel owner had walked the Camino, and afterwards he wanted to serve the pilgrim community. So he added an albergue to his business in Villafranca Montes de Oca. The albergue is quite nice, and pilgrims staying there can also enjoy the upscale hotel bar and the pilgrim's menu served at the restaurant. Atapuerca was my next stop, and once again, private rooms were hard to come by. In searching online, I came across a website for a casa rural that wasn't listed in the Camino apps or on gronze.com. A casa rural is a house in the country or in a small village or town that is rented out either as an entire house, like a vacation rental, or, as is often the case along the Camino, room by room. Your host may or may not speak English, and they may or may not live on site. In this case, the owners have 3 houses, one in Atapuerca, one 3 kilometers away in Olmos de Atapuerca, that's spelled Olmos, by the way, and another one a 12-minute drive away in the speck of a village, Fresno de Rodia, which is where the owners live. I ended up in Fresno in a private room with a big, comfortable bed and a private bathroom. The owner, Rosa, picked up me and another pilgrim in Atapuerca, took us home, and Rosa's husband, Rafa, made us dinner. The next morning, Rosa delivered us back to the Camino. It was a perfect solution to a sold-out town. The room was only 47 euros, dinner was 20, and the ride was 15, payable only in cash. The name of the place, by the way, is El Brocal. Now, remember, I was in relatively unfamiliar territory at this point, having walked from Villafranca Montes de Oca to Burgos only twice. So I was beyond excited when Rosa gave us the details on how to find the river route into Burgos. I've got those details for you in the show notes, but do make a note that the best app to use to find the river route is the Wise Pilgrim app. I know this because the map on that app match Rosa's instructions exactly. And also because there was a Dutch couple walking just ahead of me who were using the Camino Ninja app. They got a bit turned around and somehow ended up behind me after being in front of me for about 45 minutes. I did also check the Buen Camino app while I was on this section of the trail, and that map had less detail than the Wise Pilgrim app. So that's my recommendation, the Wise Pilgrim app to get you into Burgos. In any event, the walk from Atapuerca to Burgos was gorgeous. Well, at least it was in the spring when everything is green. And now there are 2 towns not far from Atapuerca with bars offering pilgrim breakfasts and cafés con leche. Good thing, because this was my longest day of all, 20 kilometers, and I hadn't had breakfast at Rosa's. The walk along the river was so much better than the long slog through the industrial area. Highly recommended. Just be sure to keep an eye on your map so you know when you've reached the center of Burgos. If you're not careful, you can overshoot where you're staying and have to backtrack on tired feet. In Burgos, I had to contend with my second booking error of the trip. I had planned to stay 2 nights in Burgos at my go-to hotel, Cuéntame la Puebla, but I booked the wrong arrival night. So I stayed in Burgos for 1 night, but I had to pay for 2. Phooey. That was a 55-euro error. This last place in Burgos is a hotel, but they've introduced automated check-in. What that means is that you check in using a machine outside the front door, which is locked. The machine confirms your reservation or that you don't have a reservation and you need a room. It takes your payment and it spits out your door key card. On the hospitality scale from 1 to 10, I give it a 0. But I love the rooms there, and there is someone at the reception desk in the late afternoon and evening. For me, it was Lorenzo, who speaks excellent English. Okay, that was my little springtime pilgrimage with a pension, an apartment, a couple hotels, and a casa rural, to give you some great examples of the types of private rooms you might encounter on the Camino. I hope you found those details helpful and useful. Again, check the show notes if you'd like all of that in writing. From Burgos, I went east to Logroño for a night and then made my way to Pamplona and on to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to meet up with the 9 pilgrims in my May Camino Experience group. So let me tell you about that. And in doing so, I hope to give you an idea of who is on the Camino and how they are doing it. That's because it turns out that this group is fairly representative of what I observed of the overall pilgrim community. We started in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port with some of us there for 3 nights and some there for 2 nights before we walked to Refuge Orson on our first day. On day 2, we walked from Orsant to Roncesvalles, where 2 of our pilgrims stayed in the albergue and the rest stayed in the hotel next door. For day 3, we continued on to Zubiri. 2 of my pilgrims walked that entire stage, including the rocky, slippery, precarious 4-kilometer final descent into Zubiri. The rest got a taxi down the hill from the mid-stage village of Biscaret. I don't think anyone regretted their decision on how to get to Zubiri. In Zubiri, we stayed at Albergue El Palo de Avellano, which, in my experience and opinion, has the best shared pilgrim's meal in town. We needed more private rooms than the albergue could offer, so 4 of my pilgrims stayed at Pension Ametz around the corner. The next day, we walked to Pamplona, where most of us stayed at the basic Pension Escaray, and 2 stayed at Hotel Maisonave next door. That gave us the hotel bar as our meetup place for the 2 days we were in Pamplona. Pamplona is where many pilgrims take care of some errands, so I helped 2 of my pilgrims get set up with SIM cards for their smartphones. We went to the orange shop for that, where we found 2 employees who spoke English. We also went to the Correos, or post office, so those who had extra items for travel after the Camino could post them to Santiago for pickup after their pilgrimage. The last errand was to visit the Caminoteca shop for gear upgrades and replacements. These 2 stops are common, by the way, as by the time you get to Pamplona, you have a good idea of how all your gear is working for you and what you really need. You also have a good sense of which of the items you brought you actually need and which ones you don't. In my experience, no matter how well you think you packed, no matter how good your packing list is, most pilgrims end up leaving behind things they don't want or need. And some of those who know it's an option choose to send things on to Santiago. Now, let me tell you a bit more about my pilgrims and how they are doing their Camino. Of my 9 pilgrims, I had 2 from Australia, 1 from New Zealand, and 6 from the US. 2 were friends who came together, and the rest met on our group planning calls and when they got to Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port. We all walked the same stages for the first 4 days, and then they continued at their own pace once we reached Pamplona. 2 are faster than the rest, and they are 3 or 4 stages ahead of the rest by now, walking mostly the same stages. The rest are either on the same stages now or within a stage or 2 of the others, and they are all in contact using WhatsApp. It has been so fun for me to follow along as they move towards Santiago and to see how beautifully they are supporting each other. Of the 9, 3 booked all of their accommodations in advance. 2 of those did all the bookings themselves, and 1 used a company to make the bookings. The rest are booking as they go, 1 to 3 days or maybe even up to a week in advance. 1 of my pilgrims is staying mostly in albergues. 2 are staying in a mix of albergues and places with private rooms, and the rest are mostly in private rooms. That would mean staying in pensions, hotels, hostales, casa rurales, and albergues. All but 1 of my pilgrims are using the luggage transport services and carrying day packs. 2 shipped extra luggage from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port to Santiago using the service provided by Express Burrico. Those were things they needed for additional travel after the Camino. 4 pilgrims shipped items from Pamplona to Santiago for pickup at the end, again for future travel needs, which I think I already mentioned. 3 pilgrims left items they didn't need behind in Pamplona to be donated to other pilgrims. 3 of my pilgrims were self-proclaimed directionally challenged. We spent time on the trail talking about the logic of how the trail markers are placed and where to find them, and what to do if you get off track. 1 of my pilgrims had to work while on the trail, and brought along a laptop. One got sick and unfortunately decided to return home after a week on the trail. Those that remain have experienced rain, high winds, mud, slippery trails, glorious and sometimes hot sun, blue skies with puffy white clouds, tough trails, breathtaking views, back pain, leg cramps, and foot pain. Blisters? I don't recall reading reports of blisters in our WhatsApp feed. Going to have to ask about that. With all that, what has been most notable in the feed are the reports of kindness, generosity, and genuine concern pilgrims show each other. They use words like magical, exquisite, and emotional to describe their experiences. We planned and prepared together, some starting as far back as September 2023. The thing is, though, no matter how much any pilgrim plans and prepares, walking the Camino is still a mystery tour. My pilgrims still had to find their own rhythm on the trail, which they did. They had to figure out how to pack their backpacks and day packs, where to put stuff, where to find food, and what an elevation chart means in reality. I'm so proud of this group and so grateful to be witnessing their journey on the Camino de Santiago. And this is a bit mind-bending, but I will be back in Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port the second week of September to lead my next group. That's just 3 months from now. I love this, gotta be honest. So that's it on my May group. I hope you picked up some ideas and tips from their experiences. Next, I want to share some updates from the trail, but first let me mention that I am about to open registration for my 2025 groups. If you'd like to learn more about joining one of my groups, or if you already know you want to join one, check the show notes for how to let me know that. Basically, you go to my website, thecaminoexperience.com, look for the menu tab called Walk With Me. You could also join my email list as I will be announcing registration there. The link for that is also in the show notes. And lastly, you can let me know simply by sending me an email to nancy@thecaminoexperience.com. Okay, let's get to those updates from the trail. I have 2 topic areas for you: luggage transport and accommodations. I'll start with luggage transport, and I have 4 things for you. Number 1, let me refer you back to the 2-part episode I did on the topic of luggage transport in Season 2. Those are episodes 1A and 1B, and they will give you the full story on how the system works, both to send items stage by stage and to send luggage all the way from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port to Santiago. Do note that prices have gone up from when I recorded those episodes, and there are more companies that offer these services than are mentioned there. Number 2, this is for people walking from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port and staying at Refuge Orson. For years, luggage transport from Saint-Jean had been provided exclusively by a company called Express Barrico. There is a new company on the scene now. It's called Donkey Service, and the owners at Refuge Orson have chosen them as their preferred partner. That means that you will want to use Donkey Service to transport your luggage from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port to Refuge Orson, and then from Orson to Roncesvalles or wherever you're staying on your second day on the trail. The service works the same as other transport services. You contact the company to let them know where to pick up and drop off your luggage. You fill out an envelope with your contact details and destination, and you put the payment for the transport inside the envelope. Your host in Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port can assist you, so don't worry about those details. And you can also go to the Donkey Service website to notify the company that you need a pickup and delivery. If you book on their website, they'll send you a confirmation email. Just be sure to check your spam or junk folder, as that seems to be where they end up. Their website is in the show notes. When you reach Refuge Orson, your luggage will be waiting for you inside the gate that leads to the upstairs dorm rooms and private room chalets. Then the next morning, simply drop your luggage back there with the completed envelope and money inside and head on up the mountain. And donkey service will pick up and deliver your luggage to the next stop. Do notify them of the pickup request each day so they will have an accurate count of how many bags to transport. Last thing about this update. Express Burico will still deliver your luggage to Refuge Orson, but it will be left outside the gate, waiting for you to arrive, unsecured. The next morning, you'll be instructed by the owners of Refuge Orson to wait with your luggage for Express Burico to come get it, which will be around 8:45 in the morning. That means no early start if you're using Express Burico. So another way to say this is that Refuge Orson is taking no responsibility for the security of luggage transported with Express Burico. Why, you may wonder? The short answer is that Express Burico changed ownership in 2023, and the relationship between these two businesses didn't fare well. Express Burico is still running luggage transport from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port to Auberge Borda and the first few stops within Spain. Our third luggage transport update is in regards to my preferred transport company, Yacotrans, or Jacotrans. You know that J in Spanish, I can never get that one quite right, so we're just going to call it Yacotrans for now. I like things simple, so I have always simply grabbed a Yacotrans envelope from reception where I'm staying, filled in my details, put the money in the envelope, and sent a message to Yacotrans with my pickup and drop-off locations. I like paying cash when I travel, as it helps me feel more connected to where I'm traveling. And I do like to get chatty with the person who staffs the Yacotrans WhatsApp account. It's another connection point for me. But now, it's super easy to book your stage-by-stage luggage transport with Yacotrans online, paying with a credit card. There's one small catch, though. The current price for Yacotrans is €6 per stage if you pay in cash. When you go to the website, you'll notice that the price is €7 per stage. Well, that's not much of an incentive to book online, is it? It's more expensive. But here's the other thing you'll notice on the Yacotrans website. There's a place to enter a discount code. Ready for the code? I'm going to give it to you. When I was there in May, I sent a WhatsApp message to Juanjo, who runs Yacotrans from Roncesvalles to Logroño. And here's the discount code he gave me. DAG. DAG, 3 letters. So try that code, and if it doesn't work, just send a WhatsApp message to the phone number on the envelope you get from your host or at reception in Roncesvalles or wherever you're starting your pilgrimage, requesting the current discount code. By the way, €6 a stage is the going rate for most of the Frances route. Some companies may offer a slightly lower rate for the stretch from Sarria to Santiago. And here's another way to get a lower daily rate. Correos, that's the post office, offers luggage transport from Roncesvalles to Santiago the whole way for a flat rate of around €185. So if you do the math, €6 a day is 31 days. If you prepay and you take more than 31 days to go from Roncesvalles to Santiago, then simple math, the daily rate goes down. Just be aware that they don't give refunds. So if your plans change and you're not able to reach Santiago, the math doesn't work anymore. The final tip I want to share regarding luggage transport is, when in doubt, ask your host. The person working reception at your albergue, hotel, pension, or guest house knows how these services work. They know the people who pick up and drop off the luggage. They will be able to help you. And again, for the whole story on how luggage transport works on the Camino, please refer to Season 2, Episodes 1A and 1B of this podcast series. Next, let's talk about accommodations specifically. Do you need to make reservations in advance? And if yes, how far in advance? The answer is the same I've always said. It depends. So I'm going to give you 4 tips here. 4 ways to think about booking accommodations. You may have read reports online of pilgrims not finding beds and having to walk on to the next village or town. Yes, that happens. But here's my first important point. Whatever you are reading online applies only to that exact day, on that exact stage, on that specific route. I'll give you an example. While my group was in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, I was reading reports on Facebook of no beds and entire towns on the Frances being sold out. We were in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port on a Saturday night, and the most popular place in town still had beds available. For our first 4 days on the trail, I didn't once pick up any frenetic bed race energy in the towns where we stayed. So to reiterate, whatever you're reading may not apply to you when you are on the trail and exactly where you are. Number 2, if you're nervous about not having a bed or room, then book ahead. No explanation or apologies needed for how you are doing it. Number 3, there is no right way to do this. There are no rules that say pilgrims have to walk until they get tired and then try to find a place to sleep. There are no rules. And number 4, don't expect to get it right every time. There's such a huge variety of properties on the Camino, and even within each type or class of accommodations. No 2 albergues, no 2 hotels, no 2 pensions are the same. And there is no rhyme or reason to how rooms and beds are priced. No consistent value proposition. So you can't tell which place will be good and which will be memorable for all the wrong reasons. Not until you get there. Okay, you still with me? That was a lot of information. I hope you're able to jot down some notes and that those notes fit well into what you already know and expect about the Camino Frances. If you find you are feeling a little overwhelmed with your planning and you'd like some assistance sorting it all out, please swing by my website to find out what other services I offer to first-time pilgrims. I do one-on-one coaching or consulting. I lead those groups I talked about earlier, and I have a ton of audio content available that will answer all your first-timer questions and, more importantly, take you from the idea of walking the Camino Frances to your first steps on the trail with confidence. My website is thecaminoexperience.com, and all the details are there, as well as ways to contact me. As I wrap up this season of the podcast, I realize how fortunate I am to get to spend time with you. I know I've been going on training walks with many of my listeners, and I've been driving to work with others. Many of you have shared this podcast with your friends and Camino circles. Thank you for that. If you love this podcast, chances are others will too. And I'm so grateful to be part of your journey. I have one last thing to ask, and that is to take a moment to rate and review this podcast on whatever app you listen to it on. Whether that's Spotify or Audible or Apple Podcasts, wherever. Will you give it a review? The more reviews there are and the better the reviews are, the more people will find this podcast and the more the search engines will pick it up. I check the stats each week when I download the next episode, and today I noticed that this podcast is just about to pass 200,000 downloads. That feels huge to me. I remember when it passed 10,000 downloads, and I thought that was really cool. So thank you for tuning in. You are who I'm doing this for. I will be taking a break from the podcast until the middle of August, and then I'll be back with season 5, which I am hoping to take in a slightly different direction. We'll see what inspiration I find on the break. Thanks, pilgrims. Wishing you a beautiful journey to Santiago on the Camino back home and on to your next big